All right, so we're going to do an introduction to light-based aesthetics that provide a nice overview of what we use at Clearstone and what the other opportunities, what the other types of technology are, just so that you're aware. More importantly, also so you know what not to do, right? As it is what we will be doing and why we're doing what we're doing, right? So that's what we're going to be looking at. And to do that, I'm going to draw up on the board various wavelengths of light that are used within aesthetics, and then how those wavelengths of light can be used within aesthetics to try to achieve some optimal outcome. Sounds good so far? So any questions, fire away, and ask lots of them. That way everybody at home can learn too. The notion is that we are going to use energy within the electromagnetic spectrum. And so within the electromagnetic spectrum, we find all the energy and frequencies of energy that we use in a multitude of applications, from X-rays, gamma waves, FM radio, microwaves, and of course our visible light and our near infrared invisible light to the human eye. So within aesthetics, we have a pretty narrow range of energy that we're using. So if we were going to talk about different wavelengths of light, the first question is, well, what is a wavelength of light, right? So a wavelength of light is a measurement of a frequency, how often something occurs per period of time, otherwise measured in hertz. We'll get to that more so as it pertains to how fast we're pulsing a laser system. But for this purpose, as it pertains to a wavelength of light, we're going to take a measurement of either the peak to peak or the trough to the trough. And that measurement will be associated with the wavelength of light. So for instance, if we take 755 nanometers, the distance from here to here is just simply 755 nanometers. A nanometer is a billionth of a meter, so it's a pretty small area that we're talking about. This wavelength of light happens to correspond to an Alexander laser, which we're going to hear a lot more about very, very shortly. So far so good. So that's when we talk about a wavelength of light, that's of course what we're referring to there. So that begs the question, what wavelengths of light are we using within aesthetics, right? Well, there's a few things that we don't want to use, typically speaking. So basically 120 nanometers to about 380. What's this range? What do you think this stuff is? What's this, like roughly 120 to 380? What kind of energy is that? Microwave or radio frequency is going to be different for sure. This is going to be your ultraviolet radiation. So typically within aesthetics, we don't want to provide application of that energy. And why is that? So we have UVA, UVB, and UVC, right? UVA, UVB, and UVC light. What are we concerned with here? And why? So we know that ultraviolet radiation that UVB causes burning to the skin. This causes photoaging to the skin, UVA. And UVC is largely actually filtered out from the ozone layer, so we're not concerned with this. However, with that being said, if we're using a sterilization equipment, ultraviolet radiation to sterilize equipment, from one of those little cabinets that open up and they have ultraviolet light lamps in there, we don't want to put our hands in there. We want to make sure it's off first before we start to take out the instruments, because that's actually really quite harmful, particularly to the eyes. But nevertheless, these are the things that we want to avoid application of. There's only a very small number of treatments like psoriasis that might be used within the dermatological field where ultraviolet radiation is an actual indication of treatment. Otherwise, whatever we're applying here in the clinic, we don't want to do this. We actually are trying to correct the damage caused by this in the clinic, right? Additionally, when we start looking at ultraviolet radiation, we start talking about ionizing radiation, or radiation that causes cancer, genetic mutation to the skin cell. So we want to, of course, avoid that for these reasons as well. Ideally, we're going to be using non-ionizing radiation. So when somebody asks us, is this safe? The answer should be yes, it is safe because we're using non-ionizing radiation. It's non-ionizing, it's largely within the visible light spectrum. It's the same thing that's coming out of these fluorescent lamps. It's not cancerous, it doesn't cause cancer. All right, so that's our ultraviolet radiation, so we're going to try to avoid this. What's 420? Are you familiar with this wavelength of light? So blue light therapy, have you heard of that? Yeah. All right. How does that work? All right, excellent. So with blue light therapy, we can use what's called a photosensitizing medication. It's normally ALA5, aminolevulinic acid, that is applied topically under oculation. What does it mean to occlude something?
Seal it?
To seal it, yeah. So what we can do is we can apply a topical medication. So apply a numbing agent to the skin or a photosensitizing medication to the skin, wrap the skin in saran wrap. It helps it to absorb, helps it from evaporating, as well as getting over one's articles of clothing, and makes it more effective, right? So you would apply some type of photosensitizing medication, or ALA5 in this case, to the skin under occlusion for a predetermined period of time, at which point then it's, the saran wrap is taken off in the blue light therapy, which is through LED lights. LED is applied to the skin for a specified period of time. What does LED stand for? Any idea? So this stands for low energy diode. These are diode lasers, much like what's in a traffic light. They can be very bright, they can be very intense, but with that being said, they're low energy. This is what's on your Christmas tree light. Right, sounds good? Very energy efficient. All right, so this is your blue light therapy. As you can imagine, we're not using this in laser hair removal, right? Now we have our green light. This is a KTP laser, and this is a pulse dye laser. We have a red light, ruby at 694 and alexandrite at 755, a diode at 810. We have an ND-YAG laser, which is hopefully quite familiar to you, right? At 1064. Right down here we have what's called erbium YAG laser systems. Within there too we might have a thulium YAG. And this is a CO2 laser. All right, so with that being said, these are typically in a real broad spectrum what we're using in the world of aesthetics. All right, so we kind of have to talk about why these tools all exist, right? And then we have to talk about how you can apply this energy to the skin to get some type of reaction out of it. So the first question is, why all these different wavelengths of light? Like, why do we use this for laser hair removal and say like not this for laser hair removal? Any ideas?
It penetrates the skin enough to reach the hair follicle or something like that.
Yeah, so they do have different penetration depths. The YAG is thought to be a deeper penetration, say even the Alex. But for purposes of laser hair removal, that doesn't actually make that big of a difference. Now the KTP on the other hand doesn't have very deep melanin, deep absorption of energy. Not at least as it pertains to trying to kill a laser, to effectuate a laser hair removal procedure. That's one reason why we wouldn't use it. But the other reasons too is that they have different absorption coefficients within competing chromophores of the skin. So what do I mean by that? What's a chromophore? So a chromophore is a molecule that gives something its color. So melanin would be one, right? So melanin is probably like the most obvious chromophore that we look at. And it's certainly one of the more important ones as it pertains to laser hair removal. There's another chromophore. What's the skin largely comprised of?
Dead cells.
Not quite.
Keratinocytes.
We're thinking a little too hard, but I like the way you're going. It's comprised of water. 70% of your skin is water. So that's a pretty important chromophore, right? So we have water, we have melanin, and then what else is in your skin that's pretty obvious these days? If you cut yourself, you start to bleed. Right, so hemoglobin, or the protein that gives protein within red blood cells that gives it its color. All right, so those are our three competing chromophores. What's important to realize is that each of these wavelengths of light have different absorption characteristics within those three competing chromophores. What I mean by that is some of these things are more effectively absorbed in certain of those chromophores than other wavelengths of light. Like for instance, the Alexandrite laser is more effectively absorbed in melanin than say the diode laser. Well, that's pretty important for laser hair removal, because if we're trying to get energy to absorb in melanin within the hair follicle, to heat up the stem cells that are responsible for the growth and regulation of the hair itself, we want something that has a very high melanin absorption, right? So right away, we know that everything else equal, this Alexandrite laser will effectuate a greater response or more effective treatment than a diode, particularly on finer, lighter, thinner hair. Thus, the reason why Clearstone particularly uses an Alexandrite laser system, right, for a lot of its procedures. Now, conversely, the YAG doesn't have very high melanin absorption relative to the Alex. All right. Well, that might be very important if we start going to, say, a darker skin type individual where we don't want as high melanin absorption, because that would cause a burn. So as a consequence, we use a wavelength of light that has it's a longer wavelength of light with less absorption within the melanin in the skin that allows us to safely treat darker skin types. It just so happens that darker skin types also have very, very dark hair. And as a consequence, they have a lot of melanin volumetrically within a hair follicle that still allows us to achieve effective absorption, despite the fact that the absorption coefficient is rather low. It's been said that the Alex has 3 times the absorption of melanin than the YAG. So that just goes to show just how much more effectively absorbed it really is. All right, so let's talk about green. So green light is absorbed very effectively into red chromophore, right? So if you think about like a color wheel, or if you're doing your makeup application, if you have something green and you want to cancel that out, like a bruise, I guess, you would apply red, right? Red and green cancel each other out. So if your target is something that's red, say like a port wine stain or cherry angioma, or telangiectasia, like a spider vein, you're targeting the blood, the hemoglobin. So if you want to target something that's red, use green light. Green will absorb very well in red. All right. Now, so that's why we have green light. So within the field of aesthetics, we might have a KTP laser at 532 that might be used, say, for tattoo removal. And now we understand that green light is very effectively absorbed in red ink. So if somebody has a tattoo that's red and they want it removed, you're using green light. You're not using a red light, right? Because red ink does not absorb red light. Make sense? Right? To take a step further, right? Like, why is this pen blue? Well, it's absorbing all frequencies within the electromagnetic spectrum, except for those frequencies that we associate with the color blue. It's reflecting those, thus giving us a perception of it being blue. So if somebody had blue ink, the last thing we'd want to try to use is some type of blue light. It's going to be reflective and won't be absorbing. Sounds good? All right. So again, these laser systems here are typically used for tattoo removal, treatment of red things such as telangiectasia, spider veins, port wine stains, cherry angiomas. That's where this green light really starts to come into place. The melanin absorption is very high with green light, higher than even the Alex. Oh, so why don't we use that for hair removal? Well, we don't use it for hair removal for 2 reasons. The melanin absorption is so high that we only would be able to treat very light-skinned individuals. Again, skin type 1, maybe 2. But the melanin absorption, while it's so high, the depth of penetration is actually really quite low. It's very shallow. So as a consequence, this isn't a very effective laser system for your hair removal because the depth of penetration isn't that great. All right, so we're not using a KTP laser or a pulse dye laser for laser hair removal for those reasons, right? We go on to a ruby. A ruby laser at 694 has very high melanin absorption, which we like, but it might actually be a little bit too high. Limits our clientele for skin type 1 or light 2, perhaps. And then the depth of penetration, while probably deep enough to effectuate a decent laser hair removal procedure, isn't warranted in the clinic because, again, the depth of penetration is just, the absorption of melanin is just simply too high for hair removal to make it safer across a wider range of clientele. So as a consequence, we go to an Alexandrite. no American-based manufacturer makes a long pulse ruby laser for hair removal anymore these days. This is some older technology, but you'll see it a lot in tattoo removal in its short pulse form, which we'll talk about more in a moment. So this is the Alexandrite at 755, right? We're obviously very familiar with that because we use that here for laser hair removal quite a bit, right? That's your go-to laser hair removal system, appropriate for skin types 1 through all the way up to a light 4, pretty easily, right? Particularly with our variable pulse duration on our laser systems, it works really well. Make sense so far? Excellent. Then we have a diode. We already talked about the diode as being a little bit less effective in an Alexandrite laser system. So as a consequence, it isn't going to be the most effective, the most sophisticated laser system of choice, although they are the most popular. Diode laser systems are actually a pretty good decision for maybe a physician's practice or a clinic that isn't going to be so specialized in laser hair removal. These things are normally less expensive to purchase, they're way less expensive to maintain, and super less expensive to actually operate. They're a little bit more simplistic, they're not going to be as normally quite as advanced or sophisticated as an Alexandrite laser system as far as just how you can control the energy. So the variable pulse width isn't going to be as customizable. The hertz rate won't be as generous as it would be on our system. The spot size is going to be wonky as well. So as a consequence, an Alex is really what you want. But again, these have lower cost of ownership and lower cost of acquisition, which makes them very popular decisions, or very popular choices. And for most skin types and darker hair, they work really well in the grand scheme of things, but we'll still outperform it with an Alex every single time. There's a few other benefits to an Alex as well, particularly as it pertains to cooling and spot size. So if you think about it, a diode laser system has a square or rectangular spot size versus an Alex, which we typically use a circle. Although some manufacturers of an Alex will even go with a square now. But with that being said, we want a circle because when we're doing a procedure, we want to have this real nice 20% overlap, right? This is where you get a real nice, effective, consistent treatment. Soon as you deviate from that, you're not going to have the type of coverage that you need to ensure a lack of missed spots. What people try to get a tendency of doing when they're doing rectangles or squares is they try to stack these things like this, right? Like they're building a house. What ends up happening is you get a lot of what's called scatter. So scatter is just simply the concept that if I have a circular spot size, as the energy is going into the dermis of the skin, the photons of light, particularly around the periphery, are scattering, which means that they are not going to the target depth and hitting the stem cells that are responsible for the growth of the hair follicle. They go outside of that beam path and become quite weak. As a consequence, the treatment isn't as effective, which is why we have to overlap. You can tell here though that if you're not overlapping generously, you're not going to account for the scatter effect. And you have more scatter, particularly with a square rectangle, especially around the corners, than you do with a circle. So you really want to avoid this type of beam profile when doing laser hair removal treatments. This is what you really want to get a very effective treatment. This would not be very effective. You could have striping, so you could have non-responsive hair going right down the center here and look like little tiger stripes to some degree. Whereas here you won't have that at all. Make sense? Then also too, if you think about it, the body isn't a flat board. So if you look around the knees or the bikini area or even the face, this is a lot more conducive for getting into a little bit of the nuances of the human body than this is. Like this is just not very practical as it pertains to trying to hit a flat surface on top of a curved structure. And then diode systems too, as far as cooling is concerned, the handpiece that's used will have contact cooling, like our IPL machine. Contact cooling is where you have a sapphire cooling tip that makes contact directly with the skin. Sapphire is a heat sink. It absorbs the heat and makes the area cooler. But because it's contact cooling, it has to be placed directly onto the skin. Well, if the skin's not flat like a board, you're not going to get great contact. So you'll end up doing a pulse like here, and all this area here won't have any cooling on it. So you have like this beam waste factor, or if you put a pulse here, like if this is my spot size, and you pulse here to get this chin, all this energy here on my finger is going to go straight back into my neck. But there's no cooling here because I'm only touching here. So that's not good at all, right? So we don't really like this because the cooling is so suboptimal as well. So not the best design component, but again, they're very, very advantageous as it pertains to just the cost of ownership. 220 volt outlet, 40 amps, heat load in the room gets hot, no heat load. 110 volt outlet, 40 pound system versus 400 pound system, a lot less energy usage, a lot less energy absorption or consumption. No real optics have to worry about. It's a lot less expensive to have to maintain. Yeah, but results are much better here for all the obvious reasons. So yeah, when we're talking about the YAG again, it all goes back to chromophores, right? So the main chromophores, melanin, blood, water. My melanin absorption is lower, which means it's automatically safer for my darker skin types. So that's where I have to go. Now the water absorption is higher, so I'm gonna get more heat absorption in the skin. And then my melanin absorption, so my melanin absorption is lower, my water is going to be higher, and my hemoglobin, my blood, is also higher. Ooh, all right, so in taking those things into consideration, it's actually very optimal for darker skin with black hair. Well, as people have darker skin, more melanin in their skin, they also have more melanin within the hair follicle, typically speaking. As a consequence, this works great for hair. And the melanin absorption, while it allows us a safe and effective treatment for hair removal, the absorption of water and hemoglobin isn't so high that it prevents us from doing this treatment for laser hair removal safely and effectively. So it works well. So we like this quite a bit. Now this is when it's in its long pulse form. We're going to talk about this more in short pulse form for other treatment indications, but so far so good, right? So at Clearstone, we know again that we're using the Alexandria at 755 and then the YAG at 1064 for our laser hair removal treatments. Sounds good so far? We also have these wavelengths of light for tattoo removal. So we're going to have to talk about that because it's a totally different laser system. Let's go ahead and just finish out the curve here. What's this stuff here? So this is our erbium YAG, 1540, 2490. Sweet. All right, so correcting the wavelength of light here. Erbium YAG, we'll see them in the marketplace, 1540 with some manufacturers. 2940 is the most popular one. We have a thulium YAG laser right in the middle. That's actually now in the marketplace for other indications such as acne treatment, actually, targeting the sebaceous gland. But be that as it may, what these systems here are used for are skin ablative rejuvenation. What do I mean by that? So these systems here are where you're literally causing ablation of the water absorption, I should say, is so high relative to these wavelengths of light that you can actually ablate tissue. Ablation of tissue is simply to say you remove it. So if somebody were to come in with, like, say, deep set wrinkles, frown lines, pigmentation concerns, essentially aging of the skin. They're probably an older clientele, 55, 60, 65. These types of systems are very popularly used to cause photoablation of the skin, leaving intact healthy surrounding tissue where it can grow back in its place, and then yield a very nice anti-aging result, where the healthy tissue that's growing back in helps to even out skin tone, helps to cause more of a smoother tone and texture, and then helps to also reduce fine lines and wrinkles. So tighter, firmer skin, more youthful in its appearance. So these are very popular for those types of indications. Clearstone does not provide this type of procedure. This gets a little bit too medically involved, which is to say there's too high of a chance of complication. There's a greater necessity to really manage the treatment post-procedure. And consequently, we're going to shy away from this. But while we may not provide this, we do provide certain type of ablative skin resurfacing treatments, mainly microneedling, and then some advanced chemical exfoliation treatments to try to yield the same type of results, but with a safer profile, right? So they have a great role in the marketplace. We just don't focus on it at the moment. Sounds good? All right, so in a grand scheme, this is the different types of wavelengths of light that we have to contend with within the field of aesthetic medicine. And then I made an argument as to why we're using this laser and this laser to achieve the best and most optimal balance of safety and effectiveness for laser hair removal. All right, but to kind of complete this picture, I need you to also understand it's just as important how you're applying the energy as it is what energy you're applying. Because I need you to make sure you understand that while we have, say, an Alexandria or a YAG laser for hair removal, we don't use that same platform for tattoo removal, even though we have a different platform that performs tattoo removal procedure with the same wavelengths of light, right? It's like, what's the difference? So let's talk about the 4 different interactions energy can have within the skin within the realm of aesthetics. Sounds good? So interaction number 1, we'll go right down the list here. This right here, blue light. This, I told you, takes a photosensitizing medication. You apply it to the skin, you put it under light, and then some type of reaction occurs. All right? what's this called, right? So what type of reaction are we causing here? Now that makes me think a little bit more of a chemical exfoliation treatment. All right, to have that type of chemical reaction, but we're getting very, very close. Photo something. Photo. So 4 different reactions. I'm going to put them out there. We have a photothermal effect. That's going to be laser hair removal. Hopefully, right? We'll talk about it in a second. We'll call this a photodynamic effect. So essentially taking light, introducing it to some type of photosensitizing medication or substance to produce some type of desirable outcome without some type of undesirable consequence. All about balance. So we'll call this photodynamic. Now, we're not trying to cause this type of outcome with, say, laser hair removal, right? We're not applying some type of cream to the skin, applying light, and then killing hair. So that's not the type of reaction that we're looking for hair removal procedures. Instead, what we're looking for is a photothermal effect, right? Photothermal is where we're trying to take light and cause it a heating effect, or maybe sometimes a cooling effect, to achieve a clinical endpoint or outcome. So with laser hair removal, we're trying to cause a photothermal effect such that the energy from the laser is absorbed within a chromophore of target choice, which is melanin. The melanin absorbs that light. It goes down into the structures that are responsible for the growth, regulation, and development of the hair follicle. In this case, the bulb and the bulge of a hair follicle containing the skin cells, the stem cells. We're going to heat the stem cells up to at least 55 degrees in centigrade, hold it there for a few milliseconds in duration, and then that will result in its necrosis, its death. Okay? So that's photothermal. We could do photothermal in the opposite direction. So that might be like cool sculpting, where we would take an application pad, place it onto the skin, and then it would cool down subcutaneous tissue, freezing it, causing necrosis of tissue that way, right? So instead of heating something up to kill it, we could freeze it and kill it as well. So photothermal could go in either direction. But just like we can cause death to the hair follicle, we can also cause necrosis to the skin, or we could cause a photothermal injury to the skin. So if we go too aggressive, or too cold, or too hot, we're going to yield a complication, frostbite, burn of the first, second, or third degree, right? First or second degree for laser hair removal. So that being said, it's all about balance. But that's a photothermal effect, right? We're trying to heat something to kill it. So photodynamic, photothermal, then we're going to have a photoacoustic and photomechanical, or we have a photodynamic, photothermal. We have a photoacoustic, and then, which is also photomechanical, and then a ablative effect. So let's talk about photomechanical or photoacoustic. Those are used interchangeably. So think about photomechanical, photoacoustic as a jet going through the air causing a sonic boom, right? This mechanical effect, breaking something up, shattering something, right? Well, we don't want to do that for laser hair removal. We don't want to shatter the hair. But if we were, say, treating maybe a tattoo removal procedure, right? And we take a larger ink molecule and we want to take that, break it apart so that the body can then excrete it as waste, we could cause a photomechanical reaction, break up that larger ink molecule, make it a smaller ink molecule so the body can extract it. Photomechanical or photoacoustic, right? Not photothermal though. So instead of trying to heat anything up, we're trying to break things up. So for tattoo removal, we're not trying to actually heat anything up. We're trying to actually avoid that and just cause a photomechanical effect. We do the same thing with not just tattoo removal, but we do it with, what else? We offer something here at this clinic. IPL is photothermal. All right, so let me ask you this. Say you're treating spider veins or telangiectasia. We have two options that I'm aware of. You get to do photomechanical or you can do photothermal. Which one do you want to do?
Usually we use IPL.
Yep, and IPL is going to be a? Precisely right. We're applying energy over a longer period of time to heat something up. So when treating varicose lesions or spider veins with the IPL machine, we're targeting, what's the chromophore? Blood, which is the hemoglobin. Okay, perfect. So we're going to use wavelengths of light that have greater absorption within that target chromophore. and we're going to put energy into this vein, into the spider vein, if you will, or telangiectasia, get that hemoglobin to absorb that energy, heat up that vessel so that it then, or that capillary, so that it then coagulates, it shrinks in on itself. It's like you're heating up saran wrap, right? You heat up saran wrap, it shrinks in on itself, right? You do the same thing to a vein. You get it to, I should say vein, a capillary. You get the capillary to heat up, shrink in on itself. No more blood can go through that structure, and then it will then, of course, become metabolized and excreted by the body, right? And that's how you get rid of that redness. So that's a photothermal effect. If you try to photomechanical effect, you could use some type of laser system that targets red, which would be green. And you could do a Q switch or a short pulse system, which we use for tattoo removal. And you could actually do a photomechanical on those varicose lesions. But if you did that, you'd be breaking it apart, right? You'd be making it kind of explode in on itself, puncturing a lot of little holes within that vessel. And if you do that to one of these capillaries, as you can imagine, all this blood's going to come out. And then you're going to have purpura, which is a bruise. You'll get rid of the capillary, right? You're going to get rid of it by mechanical reaction, but you're going to cause bruising for 12 or 14 days, which isn't very desirable, right? So while it's very effective, it's not aesthetically the best option. We're going to go photothermal instead for that very reason. Sounds good? So this is how you have to kind of think about these treatment modalities so that conceptually you're doing the right tool for the right job, right? With the least amount of undesirable side effect. Sounds good so far? So we talked about photodynamic, we talked about photothermal, we talked about photoacoustic for tattoo removal. Now we have to talk about photoablative. A photoablative is this right here. So again, this is where somebody comes in and they have all this photo damage to their skin, all this aging, lots of wrinkles, maybe acne scar tissue, post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation, whatever it might be. And one way to get rid of it is just to literally get rid of it. You could call this photoablative effect, where you take the skin that was once there and make it disappear. You can turn it into plume. So it's taking the skin and literally just turning it into smoke and plume, which is not something that you want to be breathing in, which is why you also have a smoke evaporator in the room with a HEPA filtration system on it to suck it in so that it doesn't get transmitted to you. There's actually 2 reported cases of HPV transmission with photoacoustic or photoablative treatments when doing a skin resurfacing procedure, right? These are long ago, before the smoke evacuators are standard care, but nevertheless, they do have their risks. So with that being said, what we could do with these things is we can cause either a fractional treatment or a fully ablative treatment. So if you can imagine, I got 2 of the same spot sizes, and in one case, I can poke a bunch of little holes, or I can ablate tissue just where you see it here, or I can ablate this entire spot size, right? Where everything is ablated to a particular depth in this example here. So if you're a person that comes in with a lot of photosun damage to your skin, you could see that conceptually, this would probably be way more effective, because I could take everything that you have there and I could literally just ablate it right away, right? I can take your face and remove it, right? Leaving you looking like a complete scary ghost for the next 2 to 3 weeks as your face has to regrow, right? This granulation tissue needs to take place. These cells need to multiply and divide so that it reconstitutes the skin on your outer dermis and to your epidermis so that you don't look as if you just had a horrendous surgical procedure just performed, right? It's a little scary. It's actually really quite scary. Chances of complication are higher, or probably the highest. And by that I mean post-secondary infection, pigmentation change called post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation, PIH. So the risks are certainly the highest. The downtime is also the highest. You're probably not leaving your house for 3 weeks. Like you're really, and then of course you're really managing and monitoring this open wound at first too. So these are really quite extreme, but the results are fantastic, absent any type of complications. So the more aggressive you go, the higher chance for better results, but also the higher chance for complications. So as a consequence, manufacturers said, you know what, for most people this might be a bit too extreme, we can fractionate it. So instead of ablating 100%, we'll ablate just a portion of it. And most systems allow you to adjust this, so you can do different percentages. But the idea is that you ablate the tissue here, leaving surrounding healthy tissue around it, so that the healthy tissue can quickly recomprise the area that was just affected, so that instead of 3 weeks of downtime, you have 5 days of downtime, right? This is a lot less aggressive, much safer, less chance of complication, very progressive. Maybe you do 1, 2, 3 of these procedures versus 1 of these, right? To try to get the same type of desirable outcome. So that's the idea. So that's what these fractional systems are down here, are fully ablated, but most of them in 2022, 2023, go forward, mostly all these are offering this type of outcome, as that's what most of the people are going to want to achieve. At Clearstone, we try to achieve the same thing, but we do that with our skin pen procedures, our microneedling procedures. So instead of causing a light-based photoablation of the tissue, we cause ablation just by causing microchannels of the skin, puncturing the skin, but leaving intact healthy surrounding tissue to quickly grow back in its place, yielding the same type of results. So that's what we do the same thing here. A lot less downtime, a lot less chance of complication, very progressive, wonderful results, very safe, but yet very effective for microneedling. So we go there. The price point too is a lot less, whereas this might cost someone $500, $600, $700 to $1,000, $1,200 for a procedure. Microneedling can be had for $250, $299, right? So that's a lot more affordable as well. So the value proposition of microneedling seems to be very strong. Sounds good so far? So let's talk about photomechanical / photoacoustic, again the same thing, a little bit more so that you can get a visualization of what the difference is between our long pulse systems that we use for laser hair removal versus the exact same wavelengths of light that might be in what's called a short pulse or a Q-switch system. So let's say, for instance, that we're going to take this Alexandrite laser system and we're going to apply 10 joules of energy over 3 milliseconds, right? 3 ms, this is called our pulse duration, or pulse width, that's used interchangeably, and that's 10 joules of energy per centimeter squared. Now what we could do is we could take the exact same amount of energy, but we could apply it, instead of over 3 milliseconds, let's call it 10 nanoseconds. And that might look something like this. And you can imagine this just going all the way up to the roof, right? So the same amount of energy could be under both curves, but you can see that despite the fact that this energy is the same and the wavelength of light is the same, this application seems to be inherently different. One's called a long pulse laser, and this is called short pulse, obviously, right? Short pulse or Q-switched, which stands for quality switched, Q-switched. So short pulse or Q-switch laser, all right? This right here is going to be for a mechanical photoablative effect. This is your tattoo removal procedures. Or if you were so inclined to cause purpura and bruising to capillary, there you go, right? Not recommended, but that's exactly how that's how it would happen, right? That's the mechanism of action. Now, what is important to understand is that this is causing a much obviously different effect than this, right? This is photothermal. We're applying the same amount of energy, but holding it over a longer period of time to cause something to heat up. This right here is not causing anything to heat up, ideally. You're just causing something to break apart. So maybe one application would be if somebody wanted to, say, normalize their pigmentation within their skin, and you wanted to break up the pigmentation of their skin, you wouldn't want to burn them, you'd want to cause a mechanical effect and break up pigmentation of the skin this way, right? Which is, in fact, oftentimes seen in a lot of Asian cultures. It's called angel skin lightning, where a Q-switch laser system of a ND-YAG is actually used to just cause lighter skin of an individual. Something that we can do here at Clearstone Medical Spa, by the way. Sounds good? So hair removal, treatment of varicose lesions, spider veins, IPL photofacials, sun damage, all long pulse. We're heating something up. Some photo rejuvenation of the skin, so that ND-YAG laser facial, we're heating things up. We're going to cause a lot of heat to result in collagen coagulation and remodeling and the formation of more elastin. Tattoo removal are trying to lighten the skin, mechanical effect, short pulse or Q-switch laser system, right? These are 2 different boxes here at Clearstone Medical Spa. We have one machine that has both the ALEX and the YAG in its long pulse form for hair removal. We have separate machines, exact same wavelengths of light, that emit it in short pulse form. Here's the kicker. Never under any circumstances ever will you ever try to remove a tattoo with a long pulse system. Tattoos are only removed with a Q-switch short pulse system. If you take a long pulse system to an unwanted tattoo, or to a tattoo generally speaking, or into almost any pigment lesion in the body of substantial melanin content, you'll cause a burn. So there's never a time when you want to just experiment, see, or take a wild guess at what might happen. As soon as you take a long pulse system of the sort that we use at Clearstone to a tattoo, best case scenario, you just ruin the tattoo. The tattoo, they'll receive a burn, most likely of the 2nd degree because the ink is within the dermis. So most likely cause a 2nd degree burn. The tattoo will fade and lighten, which then causes its imperfection. And then on top of that, they'll probably blister, particularly if we don't take ample caution immediately after the treatment and provide proper cooling. But they could blister, and then that could, of course, become compromised. A pathogen can be introduced to the skin and then cause a post-secondary infection that would then lead to scar tissue formation, which would be akin to either a keloid or hypertrophic scar tissue, excessive collagen coagulation. All very bad things when taking a long pulse system to a tattoo. Gotta stay with a short pulse system. You can't cause heat. Short pulse, mechanical, long pulse, heat. Make sense? So never, ever, ever a tattoo. Sounds good? On your long pulse systems. Conversely, if you're trying to kill hair, we know that we have to heat the stem cells, again up to 55 degrees centigrade, and hold it there for a few milliseconds. A few milliseconds of time is called the thermal destruction time, right? How long do you have to hold this temperature to 55 to cause it to become destroyed? Thermal destruction time, right? It's a few milliseconds. There's no way you're going to heat up something for a few milliseconds if you're going to apply it over the 10 nanosecond region. You're just not holding the energy there long enough. It's like a candle, taking your finger, going right to the fire. You're just not holding it there long enough to get burned. You hold it there long enough though, you'll get burned, right? Well, we have to burn the hair in essence, right? You gotta hold it there long enough to heat it up high enough and hold that temperature there for a long enough period of time to kill those cells. A short pulse system won't do it. You might disable hair, it might turn white, right? It might fall out, but it's gonna come back. Sounds good? The difference between photothermal and photomechanical. So far, so good? All right, so in a grand overview, that is light-based aesthetics. And that's a perspective by which you have to use going forward in everything that we do here. The real mindset is this. When someone walks into Clearstone Med Spa for a procedure, what we're trying to do is optimize the degree of damage and safety of that patient, which is to say, if we don't cause enough damage, right? If we don't burn the hair follicle, if we don't cause enough of a chemical reaction for a chemical exfoliation treatment, if we don't do microneedling aggressively enough, deep enough, we're not going to effectuate a desirable clinical outcome. The results won't materialize. We haven't caused enough injury. On the flip side, if we cause too much injury, if we go too aggressive on our settings, and we cause too much heating, and we cause too much microneedling, like too great of a depth of penetration, if we use the acids too aggressively or don't neutralize certain acids appropriately, we're going to cause too much of a chemical reaction and we're going to cause a complication that's exceeding our clinical endpoint. So the idea is, again, to optimize safety and effectiveness in all that we do. Treat too aggressively, complication. Not aggressive enough, no results, right? We have to get it right, and then we have to balance those things. And because we have to balance those considerations, it's important that we have a very strong conceptual understanding of what we're doing, and that all starts right here. Sounds good so far? Cool. So the next step that we have to talk about is going to be the variables of laser settings, right? What are the main variables and what do those things mean? So that's our next conversation. So far, so good? Any questions here? All right, sounds good. Let's go ahead and we'll tee that up right now.